Hello, everyone. Sorry for the delay. We had a bit of a delay at the welcome speech. Who left early? Raise your hands. Okay. Most of them. Okay. Most of them did them all the way. Okay. So let's start. So I'm Martin, who I've not introduced myself to. And I'm going to talk about how scalability becomes more than a buzzword, or how we were able at About You to settle our unicorn. And you will get to know why what I'm talking about in a second. So before I start, I'm just going to talk about You really quickly. So we are a tech company that happens to do e-commerce, at least that's how we see us. So we are about 200 developers at About You, and we had our go live in May 2014, and have just drastically increased our entire company throughout the last few years. And we have 650 people at the moment in general. As I said, 200 out of those are software developers, and just last year, we became a unicorn, and that means we're worth $1 billion. And that's where my title comes from. So, short introduction of myself. I'm Martin. I'm a software engineer. I used to be a software engineer. At heart, I still am. And I've been working at About You since 2016. I also did my bachelor thesis on an internal project called Cube there. And since mid of 2018, I'm doing the tech evangelism and tech events management stuff at About You. So I also organize this conference. And currently, I'm also doing my Master of Science on the side with the focus on machine learning. And I'm a huge enthusiast for Vue.js and Firebase. And I'm currently addicted to Apex Legends. Anyone playing Apex here? 1, 2, 3. Okay. That's not. Okay, so why I do this talk. So in my new position, I'm kind of representing About You to the outside, and so I really frequently get asked a lot of questions about how we work, how our organization works, especially for some reason about our AWS migration, because that seems to be a mystery how we did that for some reason, and then also about our tech stack, and also how it is to work at About You, especially to a lot of people from the Otto group that I talk to. They are always like, oh, you work at About You? For how long? Almost 4 years. Wow, that seems stressful. But in general, I have to say it's actually quite cool, and you do learn a lot. So that's why I do my talk, because I just wanted to cover all of these general questions I always get asked. And I want to show you how we did that and how I think we got there by talking about 3 things. So first, I want to talk about our startup spirit, because we're really hands-on and we were able to maintain our startup spirit until this day, which I think is really cool, because a lot of companies, when they grow, they kind of lose that spirit. And in general, for everyone who has worked in a startup before, knows what I'm talking about, the mentality just seems kind of different compared to a really large-scale company. So who here has been working in a startup before? That's actually more people than when I asked in Berlin. That's crazy. Yeah, as I said, we were able to keep our spirit as agile as we did in the beginning, and I mean agile not in the buzzwordy way, but more like really in the essential way. Like we're always trying to shift our focus on what we are doing depending on the current circumstances, and yeah, in general, I think being really agile can kind of tend to being chaotic, but in general, I think we found a really good balance, and we are really on a good way there. Then I'm going to talk about Move, which is our organizational structure we developed internally to handle this big growth we had with a lot of developers joining our company. And yeah, there's going to be some insights in how we came to do that, and also why we think it's a good model for a lot of people that are in this general startup phase and are growing really fast, and just to keep yourself agile. And then also I'm going to talk about our architecture and infrastructure, how we came to have our SOA approach. Who knows what SOA means? Okay, few people. So ZOA means service-oriented architecture. So microservice, for example, fall into that category, but there's a bunch of other service-oriented architectures which you can use to kind of modularize and like decouple all of your systems and keep them growing independently. So we're doing that, and then also, as I said, I'm going to talk about our AWS migration. So let's take a look at the journey we have ahead. So we want to go from our go live, and then how we started our entire company, what happened in the beginning, and how that affected our journey throughout the time. Then we're going to talk about Crazy Christmas, which was 2 events actually that happened in 2015 and 2016, which were crazy successful marketing campaigns and what we learned from that. And then we're going to talk about, as I said, about the AWS migration. That was a direct result out of the second Crazy Christmas. And then we're going to take a look at where we are today, how we got there, and what that means for us, and how we developed there. So starting off, actually before the go live, from a technical perspective, there was this moment when Bets, our CTO, sit together with the tech board. So I think there were just 20 developers back then when they started. And they looked at all the available architectures and software that was out there to build an online e-commerce platform. And they didn't feel like any of them were quite a good fit. And so they decided to build a the complete architecture by themselves and have it service-oriented to be able to scale really well. So they were really quite forward-looking and do almost all of the communication through APIs to communicate between the services. And back then, we were hosting at an infrastructure provider from Germany, which will be really relevant when I'm getting to the next point. So the startup spirit. As I said, startup is always this like tendency to be agile, like that's what they claim for all of them. And at least for us, I think that's really true. And as I said, agile companies kind of tend to be chaotic at some point. But in general, I think we had a really good, we found a really good balance between being chaotic and agile and always reacting to the next big thing that's coming up, because we have this hands-on mentality, meaning everyone is like always like, when there's a problem, everyone will just jump in and like they will get together and like, oh, there's a problem with the desktop app, and like people would run up to the desktop department and then like get together and figure out what the problem is. And we are communicating really openly because there's not this artificial barrier between, for example, our CTO or a normal developer. And so we can communicate with everyone. It's totally okay to do mistakes, but you have to communicate openly what the problem was and how we can fix it and how we can avoid to not do it again in the future. And then also, I think that's true for almost everyone who's working and also in their private lives. But everyone at About You is really pushing to their best, because you always have the feeling like what you're doing really, really counts, because there's not a replacement for you. Because there will be like, if you fuck up, that's going to be a really big impact for. It doesn't matter who you are in the company. And yeah, so at the startup, we were, at the go live, we were like 150 people, and out of those were 40 developers. We had obviously 0 API calls because we just launched, and we had 0 monthly visitors on all our platforms. And we were live in 1 country, Germany. Yeah, and within the first year, we had a GMV, so which is basically all the products that went through our checkout, and those were worth about 62 million euros. And that was our initial first year. And after that, in the end of 2015 and also 2016, we had this next big campaign called Crazy Christmas. And as I said, it was a massively successful marketing campaign. And our infrastructure provider actually wasn't able to handle the extra load. And also, we didn't anticipate that back then. So what we figured out afterwards was that people would actually, so the idea behind the marketing campaign was, you can buy every item in our shop on the 25th of December for half the price. Doesn't matter what, you can buy everything for half the price. So what we figured out afterwards, that people were actually sitting down on Christmas Eve, stacking up their baskets, and everyone, like at 0:00, everyone was hitting our checkout. And yeah, like we didn't anticipate that. We thought, okay, there will be some traffic at 0:00, but in general, that was really surprising even to us, and we didn't anticipate that. And then basically, yeah, things went to shit, and our infrastructure got out of sync. We had some orders that weren't processed right, and yeah, there was a lot of trouble from that. But so of course that was a problem for us, but we were actually able to get something out of that. So because we had that big problem, we actually had to come up with a solution really fast, and there were a lot of people working throughout Christmas back then. And what we did were we actually put together small self-sufficient teams from the different departments of our company to work on the different problems that occurred. So some people would be like, developers would work together with the customer servers, like calling people and like trying to explain what happened. And then we had people like getting to the database and actually like trying to figure out where shit went wrong. And in general, it really helped us to have these small self-sufficient teams that were composed of different other teams throughout our company that were temporarily specializing in one certain task. And we were actually able to get all of the backlog that happened from that event out of the way within a really short amount of time, like I think 2 weeks or something. And yeah, so there was another campaign the next year because everyone said, hey, that worked out so well, let's do that next year again. And so we did that again, but this time we said, okay, let's prepare for that. So about 1 month in advance, the operations team sat together with our infrastructure provider back then, and they were like trying to discuss how we could scale up their infrastructure in advance so we didn't have that fuck up again. And the problem back then was that if you wanted, if you had a peak load in our infrastructure, you would actually have, the ops team actually had to write an email to the infrastructure provider. The infrastructure provider had to read, like a person on site had to read the email, go somewhere, buy a new server, put it in a server rack, and then would boot up a new VM. And I'm not an ops guy, but that doesn't seem ideal to me. So yeah. So we had that another campaign, and it did actually work out a bit better than the first one. But in general, we still had some minor problems which we were able to handle. But we said, okay, this cannot happen again, and we need to fix something. So this brings us to the end of 2016, after the crazy Christmas. So after 1 year, after about 1.5 years after our go live, we were already 300 people. 90 out of those were developers. We had 35 million API calls per day, not in a peak time, just on a normal day, on our APIs. And we already had 1.1 million customers per month on all our applications. And we also went live in 2 more countries. And our GMV increased to 250 million. So that's almost triple. That's more than triple what we had 1.5 years ago. So you can see here already like the tendency to scale in our company, and that brings that brought us to the point, as I said, where we decided, okay, we have to do something about in our infrastructure. We can't go on like this. And the obvious solution that we had back then was AWS. So I think by now almost every company at least thinks about going to the cloud. It doesn't matter if it's AWS or Google Cloud or Azure or something else. Azure, sorry, never sure how to pronounce that. So from a technical perspective, our infrastructure was really, really fit to go to the AWS because, as I said, we had that ZOA approach. And what was really beneficial about that was that we were able to migrate each of our services that we had in our company one by one. And we actually started off with the easiest one. So the smallest one we migrated first, which was back then mobile applications. So the mobile application back then was migrated first, and it actually took us about 1.5 to 2 months to get that thing out of the way, even though it was the smallest one. But the good thing about that was that we had a lot of learnings with the basic setup and how to do it. And we also found out that this small self-sufficient team setup that we used from Crazy Christmas was also really working well in those kinds of cases. And I will get to that in a second. And we were actually able to have small specialized teams for each of those migrations put together out of ops and the team that was migrating there. And we were able to migrate the entire thing within roughly 6 months. So from an organizational approach there, as I said, we had this idea of let's build a separate team. I don't think that's a crazy new idea. So, but what they thought of, so they said, okay, we have this new technology, we want to migrate, but we also have this crazy big backlog for the ops. And I don't know how that is in other companies, but I think ops are basically the bottleneck for every tech company, if not startup as well. And there's just never enough ops. Also not enough developers, but ops definitely as well. So our CTO, our head of ops operations, and our head of LPD, which is lean process development, so it's agile, just a fancier word for that. And they all sit together and said, okay, let's build a separate team. As we found out from Crazy Christmas, that works really well for new projects. So they can migrate all of that and they can focus, and we have that other team that's still working on the backlog of the ops. And then they kind of said, okay, let's do that. That sounds like a good idea, obviously. But then they said, oh wait, what about the other part of the team that has to work on the backlog? For one, that might not be as attractive of a task as the other part. So you get to use a new technology versus doing all the backlog stuff. And also, you would enforce the island knowledge. So there would be one part of the team who would be really well understanding the new architecture and infrastructure. And on the other hand, you would have the other people who have no idea of the architecture infrastructure. Sorry. So they said, okay, let's give them the ability to switch between the teams. Because that way you can go for one sprint, work in one of the tasks, and then you go back. And that way you have shifting between the teams. And you would never have that problem of an island knowledge in any of the teams. So everyone would understand what the new architecture infrastructure does. And on the other hand, we still have enough people working on the backlog of the ops. And that kind of was the start for our organization model called Move. So one of the most underlying principles of Move is something that's called Brookes Law. I don't know if anyone heard of Brookes Law here. Has anyone heard of Brookes Law? Do you know what it is? One. Okay, then I explain it. Okay, so the idea behind Brookes Law is that large teams generate a lot of overhead. Put simply is, if you order a pizza and you call them and you're really hungry and you're like, so how long does it take to get me the pizza? And the person on the other end is like, oh yeah, it will take about 20 minutes. And then you're like, nah, but I'm really hungry. Can you maybe put 3 people on the pizza making it? And then it takes less time. And then the person on the other end is like, oh yeah, we can try that. And then 30 minutes later, you get your pizza and you're asking the delivery guy, what the hell happened? I thought you put 3 people on the pizza, so it should have taken 1/3 of the time, right? And then the guy goes like, yeah, but there was a lot of bad communication between them and no one knew what exactly to do. And people were doing redundant stuff. And that's basically the idea of Brookes Law. It's oversimplified, but in general, that's what the idea is. And even though it might be oversimplified, we think that there's a lot of truth in that, and we can build an organizational model based on that. So that brings us to some of the key pillars of Move. So Move is based on 3 pillars. And the first pillar is open structure, which came from that idea of small self-sufficient teams that are working on a focused task. And you also have the opportunity to rapidly adapt your structure of your organization. So the small teams can work really agile while focusing on their small task. And they can also work across teams. So you could have someone switching from one part of the team into another one. And that gives us the ability to really quickly adapt our whole setup of the organization. So what's also really nice about this is that within bigger companies, you usually have, like, let's say, a shop team. So it can totally happen in larger organizations that one day you're fixing something on a search, and the next day you're fixing something in, I don't know, the article detail page, and then the next day you're working on something completely different. So by having these small focus teams, we're avoiding those fast context switches, which we're still able to handle because people can switch between the circles. But in general, the idea is to have small circles which focus on one specific task and can really go into one of those micro optimizations, which can be really, really good at some point if you're going into really one of those like optimizations that we have. Yeah, and as I said, we're also able to frequently adapt our structure, because if we have a new task, we can just put together a new team out of those smaller teams and say, okay, so you focus now on this new topic, and then after that you go back to your normal teams. So how does that look like? So before that, we had, like, for example, a team desktop and a team or a unit BI CRM, and with the new structure, it would like this. So compared to the last one, you would have the same setup with so there's a product owner and a tech lead, and underneath those there is just all the developers and all the people from within the team. With our new structure, we now have the same setup with the product owner and the unit tech lead, which are responsible for handling the backlog, planning ahead, and organizing the communication between the smaller teams. And the tech lead is also like responsible for planning all the stuff that happens in the architecture, and is also discussing with the smaller circles which technologies might make sense to use in the future. And then you also have, as you can see, those smaller focus teams, which are focusing on just one function of the, for example, desktop or CRM part, and they can really focus on that. So that really gives us the ability to quickly add new teams, build together new teams out of the smaller teams, and just have a flat hierarchy and like better communication within each of our units. Sorry, my throat gets dry. So the next part, the next pillar of Move is striving for excellence. So in a normal IT company, people tend to be developers first, then they work for a few years, and then at some point they have to go into management because there's like a cap where a developer can like get more appreciation for what he does. So usually, yeah, at some point you will have to go into the management, even though you might be really loving development. And with the second pillar, striving for excellence, we try to fix that. So we have different roles that can be filled temporarily, as I said, and it's really simple to join other circles. So the advantage of that is you actually have you have the ability to gain experience. So let's say you have a normal unit with a circle, and actually any of the developers within that circle, if they've been there for some time, can apply to become a tech lead if the position is open. So usually the tech lead of the unit will take over the task of one of the circle tech leads, and any of the developers can say, hey, I would like to try out to be a tech lead. You will have to commit for a few months to like try it out, but it's also totally okay if you say, no, that's nothing for me. You will have the tech lead of the unit who will provide you with some knowledge on how to do that. But in general, it's really cool because you have the chance to get into leading a small team and gain some leading experience. So what's also really cool about that is you're working with a great diversity of technology and topics. So you can also say, so I'm working, for example, if you're working, for example, in the back end of the shop on categorization, and you feel like, I always wanted to try out mobile development. And if there's an open position, you can internally really easily apply. And if your tech background fits the needs of the new position, just on a really basic level, it's totally possible within our company to move to that new position and try out working in there. You will also have to commit for a few months, and then if it's nothing for you, you can always switch back. So there's no hassle and like really big commitment. So the advantages of that is you don't have to change companies if you want to try out something new or you want to become a tech lead. It's always possible within the company, and that's why we're trying to like give the people the ability to strive for excellence within the company. So the last pillar of Move is clarity is king. Clarity is king is really based on one of the core principles of our startup spirit, and that is we don't want any artificial barriers of communication. So coming from that crazy Christmas event, there was this big fuck up. And of course, someone could have made a better job. But what was really cool about that, like after we were able to fix all of that, we actually went back and sit together and communicated really openly about what went wrong, how we could avoid it in the next time. And there was no blaming. It was just like, what was the problem? Because no one had to be afraid to be like punished or anything for what they did or get kicked out. It's just open communication. What went wrong? How can we improve it in the next time? And that's really something that we want to like base the entire model of our organization upon, because we think that's really, really helps you like keep up your speed in the company. Oh, sorry. So what's also a big part about that is about clarity is king is we're honest in our communication about which tech we're using. So I think in larger companies, you always have the problem that you have a lot of different departments, and each of the departments, the lead can decide, oh, we're going to use this technology. So you will end up with a big mixture of like different technologies throughout the company. And that can be advantageous, but in general, we think that it has more disadvantages than advantages to have a lot of different tech stacks. And we try to communicate that we are using one single tech stack throughout the entire company. And we actually settled on PHP and Laravel. And throughout the front end, we are actually always trying to improve ourselves. So when I joined the company, we were actually on a web app that's running in a like web emulator on an app, and then we moved to React and React Native, and now we are already on Flutter. So, and that was within not even 4 years. So in the front end, we are always trying to improve, but in the back end, because that's like one of our core systems that we build, we settled for Laravel and PHP, and communicating that openly, why we are doing it, is really important, because there's always going to be discussions about what's the best programming language. I actually did a tech talk inside our company where we had like a discussion about what's the best programming language. Don't do that. Yeah, there was a lot of discussion. Let's say less than 50% agreed with PHP. And but still, the idea behind it is we communicate that we are using that we settled for it, and we don't want to try to fix like the small problems that, like for example, using Python would solve or using Ruby would solve. We are trying to stay within our certain boundaries that we have in our tech stack, and that actually gives us the ability to do these fast context switches throughout our team. So you have someone working with PHP and Laravel anywhere in the company in the back end. And if there is a need for, like, let's say we have an emergency or something, in theory, it's possible that we could take a lot of people from one part of the company and put them into this really high on-demand team, which is currently facing a lot of, like a big backlog. And that's really like the core idea, that you can easily switch between the back-end teams. Also, what's really important, and what we're always trying to do, is to celebrate our achievements. And it kind of got out of hand at some point. The shop applications unit has a big gong, and whenever they deploy, they like bang on the gong. And I mean, before we were like in three levels on in one building, and you could always hear when they deploy. By now we are too big, but like the idea is to celebrate every achievement we have. And we also have a lot of company events where you can talk about like what happened in the last few weeks, to communicate about the different experiences within the different teams. So those are the 3 pillars. And just to summarize, it's easy to team switch because we have the open structure. You can specialize in certain technologies or try to gain a leadership because of the pillar striving for excellence. We have clarity is king, which enables us to keep our startup spirit and still communicate openly. And that happened all throughout the move. So we introduced move throughout the AWS migration on the side. And after we moved to AWS at the end of in the beginning of 2018, we had about 530 people, and were able to onboard 40 new developers within that time, and didn't have really a lot of hassle because we were able to keep our entire structure flat, and we were able to grow up to 140 developers. By then, we had 125 million API calls per day on our APIs, just external, not internal communication. And we had 4 million unique monthly visitors on all our platforms, and went live in 2 more countries. Again, more than doubled our GMV within that time. So you can see a tendency to grow here. And that brings us to today. So where are we today? Today, as I said, we have 650 employees, with 200 out of those being tech employees. That's like 3 months ago. And we have by now more than 300 million, actually tends to be the 3.5 million, 300 million API calls on our APIs every day. And we have more than 10 million monthly unique visitors on all our platforms. And we went live in actually 5 more countries. Poland just got added. And again, by mid of 2019, we were able to increase our GMV again by more than the amount we had before, and we are now at 1.8 billion euros GMV, like all the products that went through our checkout. So you can see here, we grew, we scaled up, and that was able because we had all of we actually learned from our history. And what I want you to take out of this talk is that you shouldn't think of company spirit, organization, infrastructure, and architecture as different parts of your company or as different concerns of your company, because it's actually the other way around. It should be based upon each other. So you have your company spirit, and based upon you should have your organization build up on that should build up your infrastructure, how you set up your infrastructure, and your architecture should be orientated and enable you to do whatever you want with your infrastructure. And that's it from me. I hope you learned a little bit about how we got to the point where we are. And thank you. Are there any questions? I have a cool throwing microphone that I can throw at people that want to ask something. No? No questions? Okay. If you have any questions, you can always contact me. Twitter, email, it's on the website. And if you're eager to know more, as I said, contact me. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the first day. And I see you at the party or at 15 o'clock in Cinema 1, talking about Laravel with Neo together. Thanks.